I'm Silvia Karman Cubiñá, the Executive Director of the BAS, and I'd like to give you a warm welcome, and I'd like to welcome Sir Isaac Julian. I have never been as daunted as I was when I was thinking about this introduction, because how does one introduce you, Isaac? It's my friend is the first thing I want to say of many years. So Sir Isaac Julian, CBERA, is a British installation artist, filmmaker, and distinguished professor of the arts of the University of California, Santa Cruz. You've achieved prominence in the film world in 1989 with Looking for Langston, which we always have to ask you about, which has sort of gained a cult following, because it's about Langston Hughes and the Harlem Renaissance, which I feel like you made it in '89, but it's more relevant than ever lately in the past few years, so we'll talk about that a little bit. You've been producing film installations for at least 25 years, and you're in too many museums and too many collections to even cover in this entire talk. And you've had so many exhibitions, so I'll only mention two. Your wonderful retrospective at the De Young Museum this year, which you can tell us about. And of course, 10,000 Waves that you presented here at the BAS. And you know what? That was 15 years ago? That was 15 years ago when you presented 10,000 Waves, which was an epic 9-screen installation and sound, right? So let's begin. Isaac. Tell us let's begin with Vagabondia. Can we do that, please?
Absolutely.
Because I'm so absolutely honored and proud that's in our collection. Tell us about Vagabondia and how it happened.
Well, it's a sort of very interesting story because, of course, I just went and saw the installation and I got very moved seeing the installation because how it's been installed is exactly how Rosa de la Cruz had installed it. And she did the installation almost like it might have been the second Art Basel or something like that, going back a few years. And literally kind of, at the time, there was a phone call from Mark Kotzier, who worked on Rebels. And basically, he said to me, Isaac, Rosa's been on her knees installing that work, And basically, she painted all the benches red, the speakers red, and it was incredible because at this time in Art Basel, as you know, she invited everybody into her home, the whole of Art Basel. It was kind of quite nuts, really, but remarkable. And so for me, seeing the installation here now, it's very moving. It's a great honor. I'm so happy and feel, lucky that this work has been, placed here at the BAS Museum, and to see it here today is incredible. And it is quite a long time ago. And it's also remarkable to be able to see, the work. We did a conservation work on it, thank God, so you can actually see the images. Because how we look now compared to how we looked, 20 odd years ago, cognition changes. We've been part of a digital revolution, that this work was conserved because it was shot on film, so we were able to conserve it. And it's a beautiful installation. So thank you so much, Silvia, and everybody here at the BAS, because it's very moving for me to have this work being shown now.
Well, it's an honor for us, really, to have the work in the collection. And aside from the fact that it's a beautiful work, and we're still having, this is 25 years ago. It's of 2000. And even in the last 25 years, we continue to ask the same questions as the work is. And it's just this evolving conversation. And And I don't know if we've advanced, but at least we've been having this conversation for 25 years. We installed it on purpose, just like Rosa had it in her house. And I do remember Rosa on her knees, painting and making sure that every detail and every screen and every speaker was covered in red, just like you wanted it. So it is also a story of friendship. And it's a story of your friendship with Rosa. And it's a story of our friendship and a story of my friendship with Rosa. So thank you, because I know there was a conversation you and Carlos had about the work, and thank you for that. But tell us, was that your first installation work ever?
It is, actually. Yeah. I mean, there's an earlier installation work which I did at Victoria Miro Gallery it's around the same sort of time, actually, in London. But I mean, this is the first installation work, because Vagabondia is sort of one of my very early works. And it's so early. I mean, Hans-Ulrich Obrist was, in a sense, the person who sutured the relationship with Rosa de la Cruz. I did a wonderful performance work with Cleo Sylvester, who plays a conservator. And basically, Hans-Ulrich Obrist knew that I needed to have funds to complete the work. And Rosa de la Cruz came with Hans-Ulrich Obrist into the Sir John Soane Museum. Hans had already told and shared his story for Rosa. And she said to me, yeah, so how much do you need? So I said, I need, like, I don't know how much it was.
It was $10,000.
It was $10,000.
Yeah.
And she wrote the check there and then and gave it to me. And that's how Vagabondia was made. So, you know, I wish I could do the same today. I wouldn't have to bother so many people, like galleries and kind of rank collectors and, you know. So it is. I mean, of course, it's 6 minutes long, but it's on a loop. So it feels more than it's a 3 minute. It's a free cycle, so it becomes like 12 minutes or something to that effect. But I mean, of course, I look at it and I think, oh, it's a marvel, because, you know, it's the way that one should make video works. Not how I make them today, of course. But yeah, so I mean, it was kind of a magical moment, and with Rosa being, you know, very, in a way, avant-garde, I think, and to do that installation in her home, it was quite unheard of. So, but it was the beginning of the adventure of, you know, Miami Art Basel, you know, why we're all here today. And of course, you know, I came to every single one, you know, really. So it's great to be back. Yeah.
And you're here now. So tell us about that work and how you have a line of stories and histories. So histories, because you really research really deeply into your topics, such as with 10,000 Waves, but also stories, your own stories that you weave in. And so I love that. Tell us about that from the very first 25 years ago to now.
Well, I can start with Vagabondia because, of course, in a way, I mean, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Sir John Soane Museum, but it's an amazing kind of, you know, 18th century museum, encyclopedic collection of the Grand Tour. He designed the Bank of England, amongst other things, and it was left in decree and law that his home would become a house museum. And it's just around the corner from where I live in Bloomsbury. So basically, Hans-Ulrich had this exhibition, Retrace Your Steps, Remember Tomorrow. It had many artists in it, including Steve McQueen, Douglas Gordon, Catherine Evans, collaborated with him. And, you know, it was a very funny Hans-Ulrich Obrist show, in the sense, like, you didn't know what was the artwork or what was Sir John Soane's art, you know. It was a bit of a hide-and-seek curatorial game. It was very clever, it was very witty. And basically, the main character, Cleo Sylvester, who's no longer with us, basically, I decided to make her be someone who would speak Creole, because in this museum, it has lots of secret spaces where artworks are hidden, cabinets, curiosities, etc., etc. And Creole is a secret language which was developed by slaves, so the master couldn't understand what was being said. And so there was a kind of mirroring of both, you could say, different types of modernity. You have the modernity of the museum, very centric collection, and then you have, if you like, the mirror of it, acoustically, through the sound, through her sort of character or protagonist. And I guess you could say that I've always been interested in museums. I've always been interested in curators. I might be a secret curator myself. My partner is a curator. And so there is a line that goes in this work from, Vagabondia to works like, once again, Statues Never Die, to my work on Lina Babardi. They're all about curators, all about museum collections, they're all about the work of the museum, and I'm interested in the kind of legacies. But I think in this work, I was very interested in trying to think about how can we make a work that is about cultural difference, but in a different sort of way, which was a little bit, because the Sir John's Museum is a little bit kinky as well. And so I was thinking, how can we bring out these kind of fetishistic parts of it? And so I think and so the question of Dublin, which is very much a kind of iconographic methodology in the museum in terms of the use of mirrors, that was how the piece is decided. And my newest work, which I've made, All That Changes You, it is a 10-screen work, but who can install a 10-screen work? But the 2-screen work is a mirrored piece. It's a doubling of the image, and it works so fantastically well, for example. So, all of these things begin with making this kind of work that was made for £10,000. Yep. Yeah, there you go.
So at one point in your career, you were going to go be a commercial filmmaker.
That's right.
And then you decided to go into the arts. Why did you do that?
Well, I made a film called Young Soul Rebels. I went to the Cannes Film Festival. It was very glamorous. Madonna came to my party with Jean-Paul Gaultier. And it was the same time that Spike Lee made his film, I think it was called Jungle Fever. And that year at Cannes, it was named kind of something like Noir Crozet. You have this sort of street in Cannes where, and it was like, the black street, because you had so many black films. It was Boys in the Hood, and several other films, Rage in Harlem, and it was great. It was really very interesting. But I think I won a prize even, the Semaine de la Critique prize. I didn't even know the prize existed. I left Cannes thinking I don't want to see another glass of champagne ever. And
then you ended up in Art Basel.
Yeah, I then ended up in Art Basel. And then I had to go back on the plane back from London to collect the prize the following day, after I thought I escaped. So anyway, but I think the thing is that what was happening in the art world was more interesting. I lived in New York for a year in '94. This was a few years after the Cannes Film Festival, and I lived in Tribeca in Soho, and that was it. I saw Douglas Gordon's work in Gagosian Gallery that he did with Taxi Driver, which was double screen work, and I thought, oh god, this is way more fun than developing scripts, with his executive producers telling you what your script should be. Yeah, so, and that's it. I never turned back. And I still make single screen versions of all my work, actually. So yeah. And sometimes they can exist in the film world. When I made 10,000 Waves, which we'd shown here, which we have to talk about, I was with Maggie Chong at the Venice Film Festival, and I'd made a single screen version of the work, and it was very glamorous. And I got some perverse enjoyment out of telling everybody who was interested in the film being distributed that it can't happen because it's an auditioned work, Sorry.
Sorry.
So I'm perverse. Yeah.
So in a way, you sort of did both, because you situated yourself in the art world and freedom or whatever it is that you were choosing, but you get Maggie Chung and you get Tilda Swinton and you get you convince all these people to work in your films, and they're big productions now, no longer $10,000. And you have cinematographers, so you have a little production company, but you've kind of you wrote your own rules.
I guess so, yeah. And literally last week, I was at the studio in London, and I thought, there's far too many people here, like where are they all coming from? There's people from Berlin, there's people from like New York, and the editing, we're in photographic production. I mean, there's lots of things. There's conservation works. They happen all simultaneously. Yeah. So it's a little factory of sorts, art factory. Yeah.
So let's talk about 10,000 Waves.
Please.
You talk about it. Nobody wants to hear from me.
Well, it has to be said, it was very exciting, 2010, and walking up, towards the Bass Museum, I got very nostalgic of showing 10,000 Waves here, which was a stunning installation. And it was the installation where Glenn Lowry said, okay, I want this work in the MoMA collection. He had already seen it actually in Sydney, and Rosalind and Tony are here. They supported the installation of 10,000 Waves in Sydney. And I mean, who knows? I mean, I didn't know that Glenn Lowry would be in Sydney, but he saw it in Sydney. And I remember going to MoMA for some exhibition, and Klaus Friesenbach saying to me, Isaac, Glenn wants 10,000 Waves in the museum collection now. And I mean, I was surprised, But anyway, when he came here, that's when the work was basically, when it was confirmed. And it was a beautiful installation. And there are certain collectors like Pamela Kramlich always talks about the installation here of 10,000 Waves. It was the most beautiful installation. When it was shown at Museum of Modern Art, I mean, it was elevated. It was kind of shown quite high. And I mean, some people actually preferred the installation here at the Bass Museum. And yeah, I mean, and maybe there could be a replay. And the rest is history. But I think that the exhibition that you had here was really quite a stunning exhibition. It's very exciting. It's when Puma had started Zeitmocker. We're familiar with the museum in Cape Town, but Joachim Zeit, who was the CEO for Puma, was already building or starting to plan the Zeit Museum in South Africa. And of course, we're very saddened by Koyo and her passing. But I think a lot of these initial visions of what Joachim Zeit wanted to do and to focus on the South, and that's why he wanted it to be also shown at the Bass Museum, because of what, this region of the Americas represents, was very much in line with what he wanted to do. And it was fantastic. I remember the staircase, that Silvia...
The big ramp.
The big ramp, which you wanted to get rid of.
And I did.
But I remember making this parkour to go up the ramp with the photographs. And I thought, this architecture won't defeat me, so to speak. And yeah, it was super fantastic. Yeah. So, and in a way, the 10,000 Waves work, which began in China, also came out of a curatorial, you could say, research. My partner, Mark Nash, had started working with a number of Chinese curators. And I remember going to this seminar, which was called Farewell to the Post-Colonial. And I thought, that's a rather strange title for a conference. But then I learned about Middle Earth and viewing Chinese culture in a completely different way from my own point of view. And, it was wonderful to go on that journey and to make a work like 10,000 Waves. And I remember when we had the opening here, Tilda Swinton came to it and was, I think she had actually spoken to Maggie Chong to, be in the work, So I had a number of, supporters in their different capacities who had been very central to both the protagonists who were in the work. And the theme of the work, of course, was around migration. It was around the thorny question of the sea, and because they died in the Wells Channel Sea in northeast England, and of course, this is a very political contention. I guess I like the idea of art being able to bring a poetic perspective to these questions. And I think that's a very important thing that art can do in challenging times.
And speaking of poetic, the Lino Bobardi work
Yes.
is quite wonderful, and it's sort of the region.
Yes.
Do you want to say something about it?
Well, of course, because Lino Bobardi is one of my favorites. First of all, Lino Bobardi is, from my point of view, like the most important architect. And she is a person who is the genius kind of curator in terms of how she thought about space, how she had designed the Maspi Museum and several other museums in Brazil, Italian, Brazilian, who looks at the South and in a way reformats the way that we look at works. And so, she is just an astonishing personality and an astonishing curator and an astonishing architect. And once I went to Maspi and saw the kind of paintings on the crystal glass easels and concrete plinths, that was it, and, that's when I started to bother Daniel over there and the rustlers. And at one point, Fernanda Torres said to me, Isaac, my mother, Fernanda Torres, is going to be like of a certain age and we need to shoot this film like now. And yeah, so I did a rather cheeky thing. Jonathan Binstock isn't here, I don't think. But I did something that you shouldn't really do.
Really? What did you do?
You have the funds for one work. I had the funds for the Lessons of the Hour. And I said, why don't I just squeeze some of those funds out of Lessons of the Hour and shoot Lino Bobardi, which is what I did. Not recommended. My bank manager did not like it. But I was able to shoot Lessons of the Hour and Lino Bobardi. And that's how the Lino Bobardi film got made. Because in a way, no one would really fund the Lino Bobardi work, which was apart from, Nara Rosler Gallery, and maybe Rosalind and Victoria Miro Gallery helped as well. But institutionally, one couldn't, get the funds for that work, which was very interesting, I think, because, you're dealing with a woman architect who's working in the South and these sorts of things. I believe that MoMA are going to be having an exhibition on Lino Bobardi in maybe 2 years' time. So I've been told. Yep. Which is quite exciting. Yep.
So you, like a lot of us, are from the Caribbean. Your family is from St. Lucia. Have you ever produced a work in the Caribbean, or would you like to?
Well, I have actually, because that was one of the works that we showed. We showed a single screen version of that work. It was called Paradise Someros.
That's right.
Yeah, which I did for Ocqueen Weirzo for Documentary 11.
Where was that?
It was shot in St. Lucia.
In St. Lucia, okay.
Had Derek Walcott was involved in that work, and also it was a work which had Creole in it, and it was really a meditation on sort of half fictionally based, on one's own biography, and half kind of developed with Derek Walcott. Yeah, that was the only time that I've shot a fictional work in the Caribbean. And but I mean, I think for me, the South, I've always been biased towards the South, of course, because of this location of one's ethnicity, although I was born in London. And I think there's a way in which those questions have been something which is niggled at me in relationship to art histories of modernism, etc. So making Paradise Amorous was a work that one had to make, and I'm glad that it's in the Tate collection today. Yeah,
that's wonderful. Do you have a wish list of actresses or artists that you'd like to work with?
Oh yeah.
Can you tell us, or just, or would that jinx it?
It might jinx it. Yeah, I think it might jinx it. Yeah.
So tell us what you're working on right now, like in the studio, not presented. Can you do that, or will it jinx it?
Well, there's a new work that I've made. It's called All That Changes You, and it stars Gwendolyn Christie, who you might know from Game of Thrones and Wednesday and other such movies like that. She's 6'3", a bit like a younger Tilda Swinton, or a Tilda Swinton that became extended, and she's a warrior type woman, you could say. And Sheila Tim is her antagonist, and they play these kind of goddesses or space travelers in the work. And that work is now shown in Palazzo Te. We're planning to show the 5-screen version at Victoria Miro Gallery quite soon. And it's a new work, and so I'm working on that work now. And that's why I had all these people in my studio the other day. Yeah, because we're busily working on 5-screen version, 2-screen version, which may become a single-screen version, and we are working on a photo series which will have a little bit of a different angle to it, and that's the newest work. And it's a work which was commissioned by Palazzo Te and Robert Rosenkrantz Foundation, Canopy New York, which is going to be a whole new foundation. It's going to be dedicated towards the moving image, which is a new space, which is an incredible space. And that it's going to be a very good space, because when I went to see it recently in New York, it was Fashion Week, and they had already invaded it, and the fashion people were there first. And so, that kind of like, this is going to be like a hot space. And I think, that Robert's going to be quite committed to doing some quite adventurous shows there. So that's quite exciting. Yep. And so that's...
So your retrospective, you just had an enormous retrospective at the De Young in San Francisco. I managed to get out there and see it, and it was absolutely beautiful. What do you think about big shows of your work, and do you think your work works better on like showing one project, or would you like another retrospective? Give us your thoughts on that.
I don't want another retrospective for the time being, no, I would say. Because when you do survey shows, it's great. It's not like beating yourself up, but when I did a Tate show and I worked with Ajay Associates on the design, it was a beautiful design, and I was incredibly happy with that. In fact, what was meant to happen was that show was meant to go to the De Young, but the De Young wanted to do their own show. So in a way, one had to devise an exhibition that would be different from the Tate show. So in a way, in the show at the Young, it has lots of works which we had to do conservation on, you know. So we did do conservation on Phantom Afrique, on True North, on Long Road to Mazatlan, which is another southern work, and True North. I mean, on all my free screen works, like they're 20 years old, so you have to do conservation work on them. And they looked wonderful, but we were just a bit exhausted afterwards. So, it's great. I think and I am doing a little mini survey show in Italy, a new foundation in Bergamo, with a very young collector, but comes from an old family of collectors. So in a way, I am doing something similar, but it's a little bit different. What can I say? It's occupational hazard. It's an occupational hazard making these exhibitions. Yep. So, and the newest installation at the Palazzo Te was quite an undertaking because it's in this huge, massive fruitier. It was a horse stable and it's enormous. And so it has many pillars. And so I had to devise a way of how to make the pillars disappear, which I did, you know, and being able to maybe take a leaf out of Kasama, you know, and her use of mirrors. I was able to kind of make all the pillars disappear, you know. We know Kasama is, you know, king of space travel in a museum context. So, yeah.
So any dream projects that you haven't been able to do?
No, I mean, I have several projects which I'm developing simultaneously at the moment. And I would say that the last project I made is very uncanny. You know, sometimes you make some works and they come out in their very, you know, uncanny manner. And so this work is very different from my other works.
In what way?
Because it surprised me, you know. So it's wonderful to make works that surprise you. Yeah, I think that's the thing to do. Yeah, so, yeah.
So before we open it up to questions, there's Carlos.
Carlos, thank you so much for your donation of this work to the Bass Museum. That was incredibly kind and generous, and it's very moving to see the work here. And I was just, you know, in our discussion earlier, talking about Rosa doing this amazing installation, literally on her hands and knees. You remember painting the room red and the bench and, you know, and coming here and seeing it was very moving to me, you know, and reminded me, you know, of her commitment almost to the avant-garde and the very early days of Mami Art Basel, and coming to your amazing house and the generosity that you had, inviting the whole of Art Basel
Every single person who came.
And, you know, it made, you know, Art Basel, it sealed Art Basel on the map, you know, and yeah, and so that's why we're here today. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. So I'd like to open it up to questions so that you can have a conversation with Isaac, because that's really what it's about.
So I have a question about Lesson of the Hour. You know, that extraordinary piece from about 5-6 years ago now on Frederick Douglass. And in his original lecture, that speech, he talked about, I think, dark and sad as this hour is, I still have a belief and hope in the American people, because if they see what's right, they'll do what's right. And it was about his belief in the power of photography and the power of connectedness through people. How would you say, in your own thinking about that power of history and the idea of seeing people, Has that changed at time? Do you have that same optimism Frederick Douglass has, or is our time of saturated images mean something else?
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for your question. It's very kind, thank you. And I should just say that, I think about Frederick Douglass a lot. I mean, that work was commissioned by Jonathan Binstock, who was at the Moore Art Gallery. Today, he's at the Phillips Gallery. And basically, in Washington, and I was just talking to a curator from the Smithsonian Museum of African Art, who is here with us at the back, and we're talking about Washington. He was talking about what it's like in Washington and the kind of policing, surveillance in Washington that's happening at the moment, and of course the Smithsonian Museum's position. And I mean, I would just say that, in Frederick Douglass's time, this is someone who is kind of born a slave and basically was obviously a genius. And basically, when he lived in Scotland to escape being re-enslaved, because he became so famous after his book was released that people wanted to recapture him. And I think there's a way in which, when I think about Douglass's work and his concentration on art and the power of art, because he was also like a philosopher, I mean, he obviously did always think that art would be the way of rewriting both history, but also the way in which one would look at a sort of space for the future. And so, I mean, I wouldn't say that I stumbled on Frederick Douglass. Maybe Frederick Douglass found me, rather than vice versa. But I do think that he's so prophetic and he's so fantastic. And I do think whatever dark times we feel that we're in, that there's a way in which, if we read Frederick Douglass correctly, that we will be able to bypass those times, through the concentration on the way that art is able to illuminate things. But I think there's the other aspect of Douglass's work, which I think is very important, is the way in which he always talked about the role of new technologies and picture making. That picture making, there are all kinds of different forms of picture making. It wasn't just art; it was speeches, lectures, forms of communication, and I think that he is such an amazing writer and an incredibly important figure. And I was saying, well, my work is showing the 5 screen at the Smithsonian, and I thought, oh, it might have come down by now, but it hasn't. I'm going to be doing a talk with one of the senators, Miss Jackson Brown, in February, and she's a big fan of that work. Maybe I won't be let back into America after that. I don't know. We'll see.
Sorry. Hi, Isaac Julian. I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of us on staff here at the BAS. I know we've all been looking forward to this vast dialogue, so thank you first. I was really moved earlier when you mentioned that there's a relationship between our collective histories and modernism. With all the challenges that we're seeing in our world today, I want to thank you for focusing on our individual stories as meaningful as our collective histories and how they're told, by who they're told. And I'd like to ask you, really especially with this latest work, how you said that it's something that is different from what you've done in the past, how looking to the future and imagining, these space realms and making columns disappear and creating these immersive worlds, how you feel that impacts us and influences us to look to the future, not as a space of despair and clamor and rage, but rather a space for reinvention and rebirth.
No, thank you for your question. Yes, absolutely. 100% agree on that one. And I think there's a way in which we can think about the imaginary as a space for reinvention. Because I think, that there's ways that let's call it the reactive position. But I think sort of that, the art has a role to play for, both rearticulation, reinvention, and the imaginary possibilities, and that's, in a way, I think why we look to art and that possible imaginary space. So I think it's very important not always to have the binaristic reaction, and I think that's the thing that's the power of art, really. Yeah, not that we don't address things, but we don't have to address things how one's been addressed, if you see what I mean. Yeah, and I think that's the kind of wonderful possibility.
So I want to get to a few more questions. There were some questions here.
For all the video artists and filmmakers in the room, I was so curious about how you approach your installations. When you choose how many channels to make, are you imagining the space that you're going to show your work in, or do you have this vision and then you adapt it from there? And I didn't realize you made single channels. So how do you do, is that a different edit when you adapt the work from multi-channel to single channel? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say, for example, my latest work, which was 10 screen work. It wasn't that I really wanted to make a 10 screen work, if I'm quite honest. It's more to do with the fact that that space demanded it to be like a 10 screen work. Yeah, so the 5 screen version, in some ways, sometimes can be a refinement of a 10 screen work, because you can choose, in a way, the very, very, you could say best shots, and as you make it into a single screen work, it becomes, in a way, it becomes more refined, but it's not the same experience, essentially. So I would say that, but I mean, one of the things I would say, for example, in Lessons of the Hour, when we made a single screen work, it was during the pandemic, and the wonderful thing that could happen, for example, when I was with Metro Pictures, they had a film festival, and it was a film festival that was online. And so we could premiere the work as a single screen work, and everybody could see it. So there's a democratization, in fact, you could say, with a single screen work and how that can exist in other contexts. So I like that. So that's the filmmaker part of me, But I would say aesthetically that, of course, multiple screen works is aesthetically more, well, pleasing for me, you could say, or a bad habit. It's a bit of a bad habit making them, yeah.
Sir Isaac, hello. I wanted to ask you that when you leave this earth, what is the one thing that you want people to remember about you?
Well, I have to confess that when I saw Vagabondia, I did think to myself, like, well, if I was 6 feet under and somebody installed Vagabondia like this, I'd be very pleased about it, for example, So I did think that when I saw the work installed here at the Bass Museum, that I thought to myself, okay, if I'm not around and it's installed like this is great, So I think if things like that can happen, that's great, So we have to see. You can't tell, You can't predict the future. Maybe you can control it a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned Document 11, and my question is about its continuous criticism during that tough period, like your thoughts and maybe some lessons. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question, please?
Document 11, criticism of capitalism during that tough period of time for Americans.
A document?
Yeah.
Documenter.
Yeah,
yes.
and it's a first non-European director.
Yes. Yes.
and its criticism after 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, he was the first sort of creator that wasn't from the West who mounted an exhibition of this scale. And so it was very pivotal in terms of all the things that we experienced. I would say that I was almost like a pseudo-curator of Documenta 11, because I wasn't actually a curator. And in fact, I wasn't going to be in the exhibition. I think that art has a role to play in all these different manifestations. But, you know, the art doesn't have to be political capital P. It can be its own, it can have its own form, so to speak. And I think there's a way in which, you know, personally, I've looked to the South for inspiration in my work, you know. So I think that, you know, the South has a lot to do with the kind of modernism that I like. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Isaac and Silvia, thanks very much. My name's Brian Stacy. I wanted to take a question that you just had, and you had mentioned a little bit about feeling maybe restrictive of reduction of a 10-screen to a 5-screen piece. As a designer for spaces and some that you've worked in, like I want to take that and flip it to the other side. Like, what's the ideal space and what would be like your ultimate commission?
A space with no pillars. Oh, sorry. not architecturally very possible.
That'd be a fun way to finish. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. And thank you, Isaac.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Carlos.